You're all set.
Thank you. Hello, and welcome to the 2020 EBSS Virtual Research Forum. It offers librarians an opportunity to present current research, especially that which is relevant to librarians for education and behavioral sciences. My name is Samantha Godby, and along with Annie Armstrong, I co-chair the EBSS Research Committee, which organizes this event each year. In case you're new to EBSS, we're the Education and Behavioral Sciences section of ACRL. Formed in 1968, EBSS has over 900 members, and we always welcome new members who are interested in education and behavioral sciences librarianship. My slides are not moving forward. Okay. With this slide, I'd like to acknowledge this year's research committee, which, as I said, organizes this event each year. So I'm going to turn it over to Annie for our presenters.
This is the list of today's presentations, each of which was selected via a competitive blind review process. The committee looks for original research that measures or investigates issues of high interest to librarians, especially librarians in education and behavioral sciences. And we're very excited about the presentations we have for you today. Regarding time, each presenter will have 10 minutes to present. We'll do all 4 presentations and then have time for questions and discussion at the end. Last year, we received a number of requests to lengthen the discussion portion of the forum, so we'd added an extra half hour to the total time of our event. And depending on how the discussion goes, we may or may not use up the entire hour and a half. You are, of course, welcome to leave when you need to. You can put any questions along the way in the chat box as you're viewing the presentations, but we will wait until the end of all 4 presentations to respond and discuss. So with that, let's get started. So I'd like to begin by just giving an overview of the presenters. First, we'll have Assessing Student Attitudes Toward Research in an Undergraduate Social Science Research Methods course, presented by Rachel Wishkoski. We'll move on to Don't Let the Space Confine You, Active Learning in Library Instruction by Heather Adair and Ashley Crane from Sam Houston State University. From Idea to Dissertation, Information Needs in the Research Journey of PsyD students, Trent Brager, University of St. Thomas. And finally, The Effect of Augmented Reality on Anxiety and Self-Efficacy, an Exploratory Study by Samantha Kannegiser, Rutgers University, Camden. And I apologize if I butchered any of your names. So please reintroduce yourselves as you present. And with that, we'll get started.
All right, hello everyone. My name is Rachel Wishkoski, and I've been a reference and instruction librarian at Utah State University since 2016. I'm excited to share with you all today about a study that I'm doing with faculty members in one of my liaison departments, Human Development and Family Studies. My co-author on this presentation is Dr. Diana Meter, an assistant professor in HDFS, and the two of us are also working with Dr. Sarah Tulane on this project. Our study examines changes in undergraduates' understandings of and attitudes towards research in all 3 sections of the required HDFS Research Methods course offered at USU in the 2019-2020 academic year. Next slide. HDFS 3130, or Research Methods, is a required course for all Human Development and Family Studies majors. Our catalog explains that the course, often taken by juniors and seniors, covers common methodologies used in current HDFS research, with an emphasis on becoming a knowledgeable and informed consumer of research. The literature about undergraduate research methods students in the social sciences is mixed. For example, a 2002 study by Harlow, Burkholder, and Morrow found improved attitudes and self-efficacy and decreased anxiety over the course of the semester. But a 2009 study by Sizemore and Lewandowski found their participants' attitudes towards research and statistics either did not improve or actually declined over the semester. In a 2014 article, Mark Early synthesized 51 articles about research methods education from a variety of fields, most of which reported anecdotal information about their students rather than reflecting a systematic approach. However, Early synthesized 5 perceptions shared by students in these social science research methods courses. These were feeling that the research methods course was not relevant, nervousness or anxiety, a lack of interest or motivation, negative attitudes towards research, and misconceptions about research. Early doesn't frame these from a deficit mindset, but rather focuses his article on teaching approaches that might help shift students' perceptions and support their learning. After prior collaboration with Diana and Sarah teaching 3130 students and observing patterns in resistance to research methods, we designed a study that would let us build understanding of our students and how we might facilitate their learning. We took a 2-phase team approach to this. Diana and I implemented phase 1 in her 24-student face-to-face section of the course this past fall. Phase 2 took place this spring in Diana's 19-student face-to-face section and Sarah's 57-student online section. So all total, 100 students were enrolled in research methods this year. To answer our research questions, we used a pre-test, post-test design with 2 within-semester qualitative surveys to allow us to capture mid-semester changes. Our research questions were these. How do our students' responses map to Early's constructs and change over the semester? What other themes emerge as patterns in our students' attitudes towards research? And how do results ultimately compare between semesters, course format, and instructor? Next slide. Our pre-post-test surveys use 2 existing measures, the drama scale and the attitudes towards research scale. Drama is a 20-item measure originally developed in an undergrad criminal justice research methods course. We used the 10 items from 2 of its subscales that were relevant to us, relevance argumentation and research disinterest. In this measure, respondents score their level of agreement on a 5-point Likert scale with statements like, I will need research methods for my future work, and I really don't care if I learn anything in research methods as long as I get the requirement completed. The Attitudes Towards Research Scale is a 32-item instrument originally developed in an undergrad education research methods course, and we included the full instrument in our survey. Respondents score their level of agreement on a 7-point Likert scale with statements like, I find it difficult to understand the concepts of research, and research thinking does not apply to my personal life. Our pre- and post-test surveys also included 3 open response questions we designed. We also administered these questions at 2 midpoints to capture mid-semester changes. Our open-ended questions were these. How would you describe research to another student thinking about majoring in HDFS? Describe how these 4 research terms relate to each other: empirical, theoretical, hypothesis testing, and data analysis. And finally, complete the following sentence. When it comes to research, I used to think blank, but now I think blank. How and when did you arrive at this realization? All enrolled students were required to complete the 4 surveys for credit, no credit points. But our design allowed individuals' responses to remain anonymous, and students were given the choice to have their data included in our study or not. Next slide. After mapping items from our measures to Early's constructs, we ran paired samples t-tests to assess the difference between our pre- and post-test time points. We coded our qualitative data in Deduce, taking both a deductive and inductive approach. We coded for Early's 5 constructs, and we identified additional themes in the qualitative data. These ended up being advancing knowledge, human behavior, the difficulty of research, researcher identity, the value of research to society, and searching or reading the literature. We tracked the use of research terms participants mentioned in their responses, as well as turning points where participants pinpointed a shift in their thinking. In addition to creating summary documents for each code, we analyzed the distribution of code applications by participant and time point. Unfortunately, only 11 participants from fall semester consented to having their data included in this research, a rate of about 46%. Although, as you can see at the top of the slide, our participation rate was much better in spring. The majority of our participants identified as white and as women, which is representative of our HDFS majors at USU. We've only analyzed fall data so far, so I can just share some preliminary findings from that. Although we did not find significant differences between the pre-test and post-test scores in our small fall sample, we did observe an increase in participants' perceptions of the relevance of research methods, less disinterest, and a more positive attitude towards research from the beginning to the end of the semester. So it'll be interesting to see if this is also the case in the spring. In terms of our qualitative data, interest was the most frequently occurring of Early's constructs, about half the instances, and research as advancing knowledge, connected to human behavior, and as difficult were the most frequently occurring of the codes we derived from the qualitative data. And finally, the emergence of researcher identity as a theme may have implications for our pedagogy. Next slide. So I'll expand on that a little bit. Some of our students showed a shift in understanding who can do research. To use their words, they moved from defining research as something only for highly educated professionals or this big scary thing that only scientists did to something that is doable and something I might be able to play a part in. Some students also found their curiosity sparked in new ways. They expressed an understanding that a spirit of inquiry is foundational to research and that finding answers to questions can be both individually satisfying and socially meaningful in advancing knowledge. Obviously, one of our major goals for this project is to inform our teaching approaches. So framing research as something definitely for you and emphasizing the research as inquiry angle to connect to the framework could be useful to consider. It will be interesting to see if our findings from our small number of fall participants align with the results from our spring semester data, especially exploring the possible difference between online and face-to-face sections. As I said, we did have a much better response rate in the spring, with the percentage of students allowing us to use their data nearly doubling from about 45 to 90%. I'd be happy to talk about this more in the Q&A, but this is likely due to 2 different IRB protocol determinations for the phases of our research and represents the difference between an opt-in informed consent approach and a single-click opt-out approach. Finally, doing research with the research methods faculty I support has given me a new way to get to know their discipline and their approaches. Diana is a quantitative researcher and I'm a qualitative one, so I've learned from collaborating with her in designing a study that would tell us both more about the students that we educate. This summer, we'll be finishing our data analysis and preparing an article, so stay tuned for more about this project soon. And if you'd like to read more about the research methods we consulted or about our measures, on the next slide, I have those listed as references for further reading. Thank you so much.
Okay, next we have Heather Adair and Ashley Crane. Go ahead when you're ready.
Good afternoon. This presentation of our research project is Don't Let the Space Confine You, Active Learning in Library Instruction. I am Heather Adair, an assistant professor and the instruction librarian at Newton Gresham Library at Sam Houston State University. My co-presenter today is Ashley Crane, and she will introduce herself shortly. Coming from backgrounds in education, we are always searching for ways to model and support engaging and active learning pedagogies in our library instruction sessions. As we began to forge the shift in practice in our own institution and in talking with peers in other institutions, we noticed a trend in teaching librarians' reluctance to implement student-centered instructional methods, such as active learning. We believe that this is due to a couple of factors. One is that we often find ourselves in an instructional space that is fixed or inflexible, frequently as a room filled with wired desktop computers in rows that is difficult to traverse. Another, as you may well know, is that library instruction is often confined to a finite period of time, what we refer to as the one-shot, yet it covers a myriad of objectives. As we were contemplating the launch of this study, our university was simultaneously preparing for SACS accreditation and the development of a QEP to carry the institution forward. The focus of the QEP happens to be active learning strategies to increase student engagement and achievement. So the timing was perfect for us. Next slide. Next slide. The existing research currently demonstrates that there is an absence of literature examining how instructional space affects a librarian's perceived ability to effectively implement active learning strategies in library instruction. Most of the literature on active learning focuses on student achievement and engagement in a traditional learning environment with a traditional instructor. For instance, the classroom teacher or the regular instructor in a credit-bearing course. Similarly, the literature heavily focuses on K through 12 learning environments and seldom on higher ed, especially not in library instruction. It is not surprising that the findings in current literature demonstrate an increase in student engagement when learning is active, and students themselves perceive they are more attentive when the instructor moves throughout the space. One gap we have found in the literature is the limited, if any, research on the success of the instructor themselves, whether it is perceived by the instructor or evidenced by an observer or evaluator. Their success, that is, in deploying various instructional strategies. A second important gap for this study was a lack of literature on active learning in the one-shot library instruction session. Next slide.
So in this study, I'm Ashley Crane. I'm one of the research and instruction librarians at Sam Houston State University. Heather and I and another librarian at our institution are running this particular study. So our guiding questions were, how does an instructor behavior influenced by a flexible instructional space compared to a traditionally designed fixed wired instructional space? And within that, we're particularly interested in how instructor movement differs between the two and how instructor-student engagement differs. Our secondary major question is, how does instructional space design affect instructors' perceived ability to implement active learning strategies? Next slide, please. Next slide, please. To do this, we chose to use a sequential mixed method design. And what that is it uses quantitative and qualitative elements that build upon each other to develop a complete understanding of a particular phenomenon. For us, we chose to do this in 3 phases. Our first phase was asking potential participants to fill out a self-interest questionnaire from which we selected participants. Then they were asked to do an individual orientation. This was because in our phase 2, we were going to use a new tool to us called a swivel. This is an instructor tracking robot where it uses a Bluetooth dongle to focus a video recording on the instructor alone. In phase 2, participants were asked to do a pre-observation survey, followed by 4 observations. We asked them to let us come observe them in two instruction spaces. I'm sorry, 2 in a fixed instructional space where they were using active learning, and 2 in a flexible space where they were using active learning. To help us analyze what they were doing, we used the Teaching Dimensions Observation Protocol, which was identified through our QEP as a potential assessment tool. And it has been extensively field tested and used by over 300 researchers and program evaluators. What's unique about this is that it allows us to quantify certain active learning strategies. For instance, the most basic is just pausing for student cognition. The TDOP quantifies that as a 5-second pause, which has been truly interesting in watching some of our participants. The end of phase 2 would be an analysis, a descriptive analysis of all of the data to this point. This is when COVID-19 happened. Shortly after our spring break, we switched to remote, and at that point we had only observed 3 of 4 for our first participant and only 1 of 4 for our second participant. So we're currently paused. When we go into phase 3, participants will complete a post-observation survey, and we will ask them to do a half-hour individual reflective interview where we can gain extra insight into some of the data we collected in previous phases. The data will then undergo a thematic analysis and a pattern analysis so that we can evaluate movement and student engagement in this space. Next slide, please. So for our preliminary results, we only had 2 participants, so we've been able to see a few agreements in our initial themes. Our participants were excited about active learning because of student engagement. They're interested in how to better engage with their students in the one-shot. They're also interested in effective instruction. They want to self-improve and see this as a professional development opportunity. They're also interested in learning more specific active learning strategies beyond the basic ones. But they're also balancing this excitement with concerns about how do I fit the content in the time, how do I fit, and how does this space allow me to fill this content while doing active learning. Because we're stopped, we only can offer our first impressions of observations as we haven't fully analyzed them yet. And we're noticing a significant disparity between the participants' self-reported data and our observations of them. One of these is frequency of active learning usage. One of our participants often thinks that she is pausing, but according to the TDOP, she does not pause long enough for it to count. There may be other possible elements at play, including instructor preparedness, observation stress, and they may be overly cognizant or self-aware of their capabilities as an instructor. And some of this may be attributed to the tenure versus tenure track positions of our 2 participants.
So our next steps going forward, since our research was paused in the middle of phase 2 of the 3 phases due to COVID-19, it is our hope in the fall that we will resume. We feel a little disjointed at the moment, but we are thinking positive that we will resume face-to-face instruction at some point in time in the fall and be able to complete the observations. Our plan is to resume that process and the data collection on the instruction sessions, and afterward we will perform a thematic and pattern analysis of the data with our research team. and we hope to publish in 2021. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Trent Brazier.
Hello, thanks everyone. My name is Trent Brazier. I work at the University of St. Thomas in lovely, cloudy Minneapolis, Minnesota. And I am going to talk about the research I've done working with my PsyD students. So a little bit about why I wanted to do this project. A few years ago, I accepted this position, and primarily I've been working with graduate students. So I was fairly new to grad liaisonship, and then I just wanted to get better at working with this population. So in order to help me, I guess, do a bit more with these students, I tried doing a syllabus analysis, and I also tried working with the instructors, what they thought I could do. But all in all, it felt kind of top down. Why am I asking these professors and looking at these professors' documents rather than actually asking the students themselves what types of support they need in their program? So I wanted to reach students, and I want to assist them in ways a little bit more than I have in the past, which is usually I get an email from them saying, hey, can you help me find articles on this topic? So I really narrowed in on this PsyD dissertation because I feel like there's much more that I could do and we could do in the library to help support students going through this process. Next slide, please. Right, so a little bit about the students in this program. So our PsyD program is a 4-year cohort model. So there's one new cohort every year, and they have about 15 to 20 students in them. And they really have a really kind of prescribed schedule. You know, if it's the fall of their 3rd year, they're going to be taking this, this, and this. So during their 2nd year, at the end of spring, actually today is the due date, it's a big day for them. Students turn in a draft of the first 3 chapters of their dissertation, which those chapters are the intro, lit review, and methods chapters. So throughout the 2nd year, they're really working on building up to this. And to help them with that, there's a 1-credit class that they take in the fall and spring, and they'll be continuing one in the summer. So for a total of 3 credits called the Dissertation, Writings, and Methods. Writing and Methods. And this year's cohort, there are 15 students in the cohort. So I really wanted to focus on working with them through this process. Next slide, please. So in wanting to work with assist students with the dissertation process, I identified the 2nd year as really kind of the most important place for that. So in looking at that, I wanted to answer these 2 research questions. First are, what are their self-identified, so I wanted to get it from them, the information needs of PsyD students throughout the process. So that's throughout as time goes by, not just at one point in the process. And then what preferences do they have? So if I were to develop some sort of new service or create some sort of online module or something, what are the preferences for that? Would it be a face-to-face session? Would it be drop-in? Would it be something they scheduled ahead, and just a little bit more about kind of their preferences for anything additional. Next slide, please. Okay, so I did two-stage qualitative design. I worked very closely with the instructor of the dissertation writing and methods course, who was really kind to let me kind of have free reign with what I call the qualitative diaries assignment. So essentially what I asked the students to do is once a month about, which is when this class occurs, it's just one credit. What they have to do is fill out what I've been calling a diary, and they call their accountability assignments, is basically fill out a 6-question form, which asks about what steps have you taken in the past month on your dissertation, how did you go about that, what issues did you run into, how did you overcome them, what supports would have been nice along the way or would have been helpful along the way. So those really got at my research question 1. So the students actually filled that out for their assignment. They turned it in for credit. And basically all I did through the IRB was, and the consent discussion was, ask the students if they would be willing to have the professor send that assignment to me. And 14 of those 15 students agreed. And so that data collection is continuing through today, which also do, besides those first 3 chapters, is the final qualitative diary. And then next week, I'm going to be trying to see who I can recruit from those 14 students to do follow-up Zoom interviews about, again, their process, and really get it at answering question 2. So what support preferences do they have? I want to do that over the next month. Next slide, please. So since I don't have that interview data, I'm just working from the diaries that I do have so far. And here are just some of the preliminary findings. Admittedly, my questions don't necessarily ask specifically about the information needs, but kind of more about the needs of these students in general. And I think that's actually a good thing, because if I just got to add specific information needs, that would just say things like, I need more information on this topic. That I got kind of a broader view of what issues these students are running into and where support's useful. One is just, of course, these are super busy people, so there's a lack of time, and that has other negative effects. It makes them not want to work on this because they see it as just a project. So then they procrastinate and think, oh, I've got a half-hour free time, why don't I watch Netflix instead? And then after that, they feel guilty about it. Also, these are kind of tied in with that time thing. These are real people in the real world. So many people share things about their families, family members passing, the emotional effect it's had on them and their ability to get some of these things done. I've not seen much about COVID yet, but I expect to see more about that in this final diary that we'll be bringing in today. But yeah, they really have just a lot going on besides just working on their dissertation. We as librarians kind of only see them in that one mode. The dissertation committee, these are kind of their go-to people for everything, and I was kind of surprised to see that this includes things that we as librarians do, including search strategies. I understand that these are more subject experts, so they might know what papers and what out there in the field. But I think we would have a lot more as librarians to support in this space. So I've been thinking about how to get in closer with that dissertation committee. Things that are working working with their peers on this who are also going through the same exact thing. And then, although they hate deadlines, they actually help them get things done, or positive outlook after they get something completed. All right, individual style. Everyone kind of approaches this differently. We're all different people, and they have just a gigantic project, so they have to find what works for them. And it's try to experiment in just about every aspect of this. And finally, they are just chipping away. They slowly seem to realize that all I can do is little by little. I can't just cram this in and get a bunch done at once. It's just a bunch of small pieces adding up to all. And last slide, please. That's what I found so far. So I'll be happy to answer questions during the Q&A. And please contact me with any individual questions.
Thanks, Trent. Next, we have Samantha Kannegiser.
Hello, I am Samantha Kannegiser. I am a student success librarian for Rutgers University in Camden. Last summer, I developed an augmented reality library orientation for some of our incoming students. With this orientation, I wanted to determine if augmented reality or AR affected incoming students' feelings of library anxiety and self-efficacy towards the library. Some background on that. Excuse me. So library anxiety is a theory introduced by Constance Mellon, and it refers to students' fear about the perceived large size of the library, locating items, in a general sense that they don't know how to use the library properly. Normally that's coupled with a feeling of inadequacy and a belief that they're the only ones experiencing that fear. Self-efficacy, however, is a concept introduced by Albert Bandura and refers to an individual's belief that they have the ability to produce a desired outcome. So essentially, we're talking about how confident a person feels that they could complete an objective. So there's a lot of research out there about the inverse relationship between anxiety and self-efficacy, particularly in an academic context, such as with like writing, test, or math anxiety. And then there's also a body of research done in a variety of settings on the effects of AR on both anxiety and self-efficacy, but those results are pretty inconclusive from what I can find. So my plan was to build on this prior research by studying the effect of AR specifically in a library context on anxiety and self-efficacy, and then more specifically, if an AR orientation would reduce students' library anxiety and then simultaneously increase their feelings of confidence. So to do this, I had two groups of incoming students take two separate orientations so that I can compare the traditional to the augmented reality. You can go to the next slide. So the control group completed a traditional self-paced scavenger hunt version of an orientation. So they saw clues and questions administered via a SurveyMonkey survey, which they accessed on their personal device or library iPad. The treatment group then completed an AR version of this scavenger hunt. So, excuse me. So they completed the activity by viewing an augmented reality flyer, such as the one that you see on the screen now. And the flyer was at each scavenger hunt stop, and it would guide them through the activity by informing them of whatever resource the flyer represented, and then give a clue for where they should go next. So by scanning the flyers with either their phone or an iPad, students would trigger the AR component to play on top of the flyer. So it would give this illusion that this flyer was coming to life. So in this example, this is an image of our associate Jen. When the students scanned the flyer, this image of Jen would start speaking to them. So they'd be standing at the circulation desk, see this image of Jen on the other side of the circulation desk, and she would start talking to them orienting them to this space. So both the control and treatment groups received the same clues, had access to the same information, they were just receiving it in different formats. For reference here, I did all of the augmented reality design using a subscription platform called Zappar, and that's Zappar. If you wanted to view this from home, you would just have to download the Zappar app onto your phone, hold it up to the screen where this flyer is shown, and then the AR component would play for you much the same way it would in person. I think it's a little bit more effective in person because you're really getting the feel of a digital component on top of a physical component, hence the augmentation. But you can definitely get a good idea of how this worked for students if you wanted to do it from home on the computer. So to test the effects of the orientation, I had both of my groups take a pre and post orientation survey. And I had 21 students take it in my treatment group and 22 take it in my control group. You can move to the next slide. So these are the survey items I used. The pre-orientation survey consisted of the 5 statements, those first 5 on the left. And those were modified from the library anxiety scale, which is a validated instrument used for measuring library anxiety. So I modified the scale both for wording and length because my participants were unlikely to have experience with the library beforehand. This was summer before their semester started. And also I wanted a short instrument, which was more likely to be completed in full, and also would let me really keep the orientation as the main focus of the day and not the survey itself. So those first 5 questions appeared on both the pre and post orientation surveys, measuring just general library anxiety and confidence. And then on the post orientation survey, I added an additional 5 statements, which you can see on the right there. So the first 2 relate specifically to our university library. So those statements were measuring, are students confident, navigating our library, using our library after we had oriented them to the building and people and services. I'm sorry about that. So then the last few statements just measure student satisfaction with the orientation experience. And I modified those statements from a survey that was done in 2018 for an instruction session by an author named Chris Marino. So all of these survey questions were scored using a forced choice 4-point Likert scale with anchored first and last numbers. So 1 would have been labeled strongly disagree, 4 labeled strongly agree, and then students would read each statement and rate it based on how they felt. To analyze the data, I ran paired sample t-tests for the matched pre and post orientation questions within each group. And that was to determine if the respective orientations had an impact on students' anxiety and confidence. Any question or a statement which was determined to have a significant impact was then measured for effect size. Once I understood the effect of each orientation, I could then compare the results of the control group to the treatment group. And to do that, I ran independent sample t-tests on the post-orientation question averages in order to compare one to the other. You can move to the next slide. So my findings were subtle, but I found them to be encouraging. The AR orientation had a significant and positive impact on these 2 measures of anxiety and confidence. So 1, belief that the students believed that librarians wanted to help them more so than they did before the orientation. And then also the students' belief in themselves that they know how to use academic libraries. Now, however, the augmented reality impacted both of these really well, but it only outperformed the traditional orientation in the factor of anxiety here. They're the students' perceptions that librarians and staff want to help them. So this variable is directly related to the library anxiety factor of barriers with staff, which if the orientation was going to affect any anxiety factor, I was happy that it was that one. My thinking being that new students will continue to be exposed to other aspects of the library, such as the building and resources throughout their first semester, particularly when we do our library instruction in that first semester. So that's another chance for us to reduce anxiety with these other factors. But I'm thinking that that instruction that we do would be a lot more impactful if students are already convinced that we are truly supportive of them, that we're not just doing this like, oh, it's my job, I have to help you, but that we desire to help them, that that's something we want. So I think if you can convince students of that via orientation this summer, all those forthcoming efforts that happen in the fall could have more of an impact. Additionally, I was happy about this because when we think about the sustainability of an AR orientation, students can take this orientation at any time as long as I have the flyers up. So 9 a.m., 9 p.m., it doesn't matter. They would hear a consistent message from librarians without requiring us to physically take part in every library tour and every library orientation. And it also exposes them to, the full staff, because everyone was on a different flyer. So you're hearing from our director and librarians and staff. So it lets us connect with students on a grander scale than if we were to do these all directly in person, which obviously is limited by availability. Just practically speaking, I used a subscription platform to create this, but there are free versions out there. There are freemium AR platforms. So in terms of cost, barrier to entry is pretty low. But the time commitment it takes to learn a platform and then design an orientation or instruction session around a new technology, in a way that's meaningfully using the tech, that part can be pretty time consuming. So I think the results of this could, help justify that time commitment for other librarians that wanted to, delve into the world of AR. And again, there's potential here to create something sustainable that doesn't require us to do multiple physical orientations, but it's still incorporating human connection and a welcoming experience for new students. You can go to my next slide, which just has some references for some of the authors I mentioned, but other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Thank you so much. At this point, we have time for questions. So I'll go back and repeat some of the questions we received along the way. But please enter any questions for any of the 4 presenters in the chat box using the all panelists and attendees option. And you're also welcome to raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question aloud rather than via chat. So let's get started with that. And I'll go back. We received a question earlier from Rachel's presentation, just asking to clarify the instrument that she used. And I think I got it. I responded, but I think it would be helpful for everyone to, I'm sorry, that wasn't Rachel. It was to Ashley and Heather for the second phase of their project.
We used the Teaching Dimensions Observation Protocol, or TDOP. Heather put the link into more additional information on that as well.
Okay.
I just put it, this is Heather, I just put it back into the chat just in case it got lost in the feed. So it should be the most recent post in the chat.
The next question was to you both as well about the effects of COVID-19 on your research. I don't know if you want to go ahead and talk about that.
I'll go ahead since Ashley hasn't unmuted yet. Our stance right now is that we are hopeful that our university will opt to have face-to-face classes in the fall. We are remote only and online only for the summer. They are currently in conversations about the fall semester with an option A, B, or C, or plan A, B, and C. So we are hoping they go with plan A, but we do recognize that instruction will probably look different, even in plan A, which is a face-to-face in-person instruction model that is cognizant of social distancing. So we haven't fully thought through that yet, as we know that it will also impact what you're able to do in an active learning environment. but we're kind of taking it as it goes, and we will adjust our plan accordingly. Ashley, did you want to add to that?
I was also going to mention that our library went into renovation this summer, which is why we're in study carrels instead of in our offices. And when we started collecting this data, we had one room that was a flexible learning space and one room that was a fixed learning space, and both of those classrooms have been ripped out by this point. So even when we do go back in the fall, if we get to do face-to-face, we will have to rethink what spaces we'll be using to capture this type of information.
And there are a couple of questions for Samantha. First of which, how do you successfully have students agree to be a part of your study? How did you deal with permissions for incoming students who are under the age of 18?
So this study, so I don't know if anyone heard, so my treatment group had 21 and my control had 22. So this was pretty small. And that is because this is with two specific groups that come onto campus in the summer to get oriented to campus, and including the library. So we just had them for one morning. So it was kind of twofold. One, this was IRB approved. So as part of the consent form that showed up before they took the survey, they had to self-identify that they were over 18. But I also had the privilege of, I talked quite a lot with the program organizers for these, and I kind of unofficially knew that they were all of age. So I had a feeling that I was going to be able to capture most of them, that that at least wouldn't be a barrier to them taking the survey. So that wasn't too big of an issue. Just again, it was a small enough group that I could kind of keep track of that pretty well.
And what part of the summer did the students do the tours in? That was another question.
One was in July and then another was in August.
I wonder if each of the presenters might address that question of how you recruited participants. Each of you did human subjects research, and in Trent's study in particular, I was curious about the extra writing that they did for your project, but I think each of you might have something to share about recruiting.
This is Trent. I'll go. So the professor that teaches that one credit course, she normally gives a similar assignment that had them kind of reflect on their progress. And so what she did is she adopted my questions as a reflection assignment. So they basically got points to do it for class. So that was kind of their motivation to actually fill it out.
And Trent, as long as you're speaking, we can go back and go through the other participants, but there's a new question for you. Mm-hmm. You mentioned that many of your students have overestimated their ability to use the library. Could you elaborate a bit more about that?
Yeah, a few of them thought that they knew exactly what they were doing, but then there were a few times, there was one great one that I'm sure I'll have to quote, but it just started out their post with, "I literally have no idea how the library works." It sounds like he got all the call numbers and then he said, "I spent a half hour looking around and don't know how this works. I ended up just requesting the books that they would pick them for me." Mm-hmm. So, and then the places where they search for things, a lot of them use our kind of federated search aggregator. And I think some of the professors push them towards that, but if you're really doing in-depth oral level research, you need to get in and use subject heading, subject terms as well. So you can't use Primo and aggregator like that. So Yeah, I guess I just came in with a little more confidence, like, yes, I've done this for my master's program, I know what I'm doing, and then there's just, they have to have so much more depth.
And there's a question from the same person asking you to clarify, what methods do you use to contact students to ask them about their preferences about what the library can do for them?
So I'm going to send out a recruitment email for this second part of the study, which will be a Zoom interview, which I'm going to talk. One of the big focuses of that will be their preferences. So that will be an interview, and we'll see how many of those students that did the diaries assignment will be willing to participate in that. I made sure to do that after those 3 chapters were due.
Great, thank you. So if the other participants would like to address Samantha's question about recruitment and IRB.
Sure, this is Rachel. I'd be happy to jump in, and maybe I can address the question I see in the chat for me as well. But for recruitment and IRB, we were recruiting within the sections, which I mentioned. And to expand a little bit, it was interesting to see the difference in students who consented to allow us to use their data in our study. Like I said, in the fall, we had an informed consent process where students had to, could actively consent, versus the second phase was a one-click opt-out that informed students that we had collected, these data and would like to use it, but if they did not want us to, they only had to click one button. And so it maybe seemed like a subtle difference, but it had a pretty dramatic impact, I think. The reason for the difference in the spring was that our IRB kind of took a second look at our second phase and said we were using secondary data that had already been collected as part of the course. And because it was anonymous, we could use it, but our research ethics, because we'd seen such a low consent rate in the fall when we gave students that option, our research ethics kind of compelled us to say we need to give students at least the option of a one-click opt-out. For those of you who are maybe interested in doing something like this, we did link students' responses to all of the surveys over the semester to one another, and we were able to give students credit by keep their responses anonymous by having them attach a 6-digit code that they generated and entered with each of their responses. And it was based off of their birth month and last 4 digits of the phone number that they use most frequently. So those are pieces of information we didn't have access to as a research team, and would thus keep students' anonymity and privacy protected while still being able to have us link responses and ultimately give them credit for their work. Our final question on each survey directed students to a separate Qualtrics survey where they would enter their name for assignment credit, if that kind of makes sense. So that was kind of the biggest IRB and recruitment issue. Could I go ahead and answer the other question I see in the chat?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so I'll just read it for folks if that's helpful. So it's from Catherine, and it says, regarding your lit review for your study, what kinds of overlap did you find between the research on teaching and learning research methods in comparison with the research on teaching information literacy, or did you focus more on the former? So we did focus more on the former, and that was due to the fact that, I'm a librarian collaborating with faculty in my discipline. We wanted to take kind of a zoomed out look at the course as a whole. We do integrate information literacy pretty closely through modules in the online version of the course, and in 2 in-class sessions in the face-to-face course, plus a lot of other content that is kind of integrated into the course by the instructor when I'm not there. And so for us, the question was less about you know, how am I doing in teaching those skills, and more what is the bigger picture of students' perceptions of this course and the idea of research and research methods overall. I'd say definitely, you know, some of the library anxiety themes that Samantha brought into play do play in here and connect to some of those bigger picture themes in the literature on teaching and learning research methods. And I think this question is also interesting and probably something to unpack more in our lit review about different conceptions of the word research. So for librarians, it may mean different things than it does to our faculty who do empirical research. You know, we of course are researchers as well, but sometimes the process of searching and finding literature is labeled research, as well as the process of gathering and analyzing data. And so it might be interesting to unpack more what that word means for students and faculty and librarians.
Wonderful, thank you.
This is Heather. I'll jump in and address the IRB question for the active learning study. We knew that our sample size was going to be small because we're looking at instruction conducted by librarians, basically in a one-shot setting. Well, there's really only about 15 of us currently. We have a few vacancies, but there's 15 of us that are librarians, and about 12 of us do instruction. So that limited our pool quite a bit. So we knew pretty much who we were targeting for potential participants, but wrote our IRB such that we knew that the participant needed to teach on our main campus, that they were going to be in a certain age range, et cetera. And that they were teaching, they were not staff members, they were actual faculty librarians. In addition to that, we made sure that we built in a confidentiality piece, because as you can imagine, if somebody's observing your instruction, some of us might feel a little intimidated by that. So we did build in a safety catch for confidentiality of the participants, which is also, as Ashley mentioned, why we did individual orientations of the participants. We did, of course, have students and other teaching faculty in the room during observation. So we did have an opt-out or opt-in paperwork, basically, so that the students and the faculty member knew that they were going to be recorded, because it is video recorded, and knew that we were using the recording potentially maybe in a presentation at a conference, but primarily for analysis of the library instructor, not the analysis of anybody else in the room. So that is a component in our IRB, and we do collect that paperwork for every session that we observe. We do a very brief 5-minute or less introduction to what is going on in the session, so that everybody in the room is aware of what's happening. And we pass out the paperwork at that time. We do also ask that the participant inform the faculty member that they're going to do instruction for ahead of time, so that the faculty member grants permission in advance and there's no surprises. So then that's already taken care of. And then of course we store all of our data in a secure location, whether it's paper or digital. So hopefully that helps answer that question. There was another question in the chat that I could probably answer from Nancy about how large our classes are. And our classes vary. We teach, if it's a master's or graduate level or PhD level course, we could have as few as 4 to 5 students in that class, all the way up to freshman history. We often have to break those classes into 3 groups because that can reach 100 plus. So it varies. Primarily in what we have observed, that seating space, as Ashley mentioned, which has now been demolished, seats no more than 28. So that was the upper end of anything that we observed. And Corrine, to answer your question, Texas is not unionized.
Okay, the questions were flooding in. I believe Trent was answering them via chat, but it might be helpful to share for others as well. They seem to be about faculty buy-in with the study. Could you address that to the entire group, Trent, a little bit more?
Yeah, so this study just pretty much affected one class. I think the question was kind of more about, so what is your program right now? And it's basically, yeah, a bunch of one-shots where you see these students about in each cohort. I see each of them about once a year, maybe. Definitely right at the beginning, I give a big intro to them, and then kind of spots here and there with other classes. But there's not an overall like plan I have set up with them, which is kind of something I would like to come out of this study to say, hey, these are the things that students need, and here's what I can do from the library end. And then there's a question about contacting students directly, rather than always going through the instructors, faculty, and I don't see a problem with that. I've never done that myself to email them, but I mean, if they ask me a question in class, then I would follow up with them over email if I needed to do that. So I really don't see how that's a problem. And these are doctoral students. It's not like I'm emailing an 18-year-old out of the blue necessarily. These are people steeped in research and really need kind of that one-on-one help. So I don't see any problem with it. And that's kind of crazy, Casey, that you had. There's that. No way.
So there's just a clarification. So from Casey Williams that they're dealing with a community college student population. So that's a different end of the spectrum.
And Casey, if you have more you'd like to expand on about that, we'd love to hear about your experience. You're welcome to unmute your microphone and chime in.
Let's see. I don't see any hands up, but if anyone does prefer to ask a question verbally, you can use the raise your hand button to do that, and then we'll unmute you, or maybe you can unmute yourself, actually. I have a question. I would love to know more about, from Samantha, what your plans might be for the future of augmented reality tours and how you could see this evolving in the current climate with COVID-19.
Sure. You know, I've thought about it quite a bit because normally what I would be doing right now is kind of refining the old orientation to get ready for July. And, you know, we're in New Jersey, we're pretty much assuming that's definitely not going to happen. There are other ways to use augmented reality. I don't know that you can really mimic the tour in the same way because I'd have to still be sending students some sort of, physical document for the augmented reality to play on top of. So taking a picture of the circulation desk wouldn't have quite the same effect as them standing there. But some of the things we've talked about just in terms of outreach are like even bookmarks that go into, the students' folder, when they do their, orientation more generally. And that could have something where you scan it and, something of me pops up welcoming them to the library. So some of that same, the goal to be to welcome them and make them comfortable and see us as a place that they can come for help and that, they're not bothering us. I think there's still a way to use augmented reality for that. But I have not found a good solution for doing that in a way that gets them comfortable within our building if we're assuming they may not even be allowed in our building right now.
It seems like there's great potential though for the adding a human element at this time, to our services.
Yeah, we're always looking to how do our virtual selves, do something as warm and welcoming as we do face to face. And I do think that I see Casey's talking about virtual reality. I have not worked with VR. I played a little bit with Google Cardboard in creating like some programming. You can look at different places around the world with Google Cardboard. But I like the AR a little bit more because I find it easier to use and the barrier is not there in terms of as much with accessibility. VR goggles tend to leave some people out. Some people get very dizzy using them. Some people find them uncomfortable. AR has so many different applications that I think it leaves it open to more people than the VR necessarily does. But these are all good things to brainstorm. I think more people should kind of embrace the AR and VR reality because the more we have to social distance, the more this might have an impact in letting us have that human connection.
Here's a new question from Benita Stranad. Trent, I've been meeting with the Ed.D. students 3 times in the first semester, and I think that builds confidence in the students' ability to use the library and in their confidence in bringing questions to me or to a librarian. I guess it's more of a comment, sorry.
I think I would, that would seem to make a lot of sense, kind of build that up early in that process. I've also kind of been considering like some sort of a boot camp, but I don't know logistically how that would work. Is that an extra, are you asking them to come in an extra week? Is that possible, feasible for them? Interested in that. And then, kind of working multiple times a semester with them in the beginning makes a lot of sense. I will say that first class that they take meets on Friday nights and Saturdays, so they don't meet too often. They just meet for long periods of time, so I don't know how much I could get each one. And these students it has been traditionally a completely face-to-face program. But yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, thank you.
I had a question that maybe multiple presenters could comment on. I just, for instance, with Rachel, I know you used the drama skill and the attitudes towards research skill. Can you just comment on like how you selected reliable instruments? Was that through discussion with your collaborator, the faculty member, or how did you go about selecting instruments and pulling from them?
Yeah, thanks for that question. That's definitely where I appreciated collaboration with Diana, who was, we were working together to design this study, and then Sarah came on in the spring. So like I said, Diana is a quantitative researcher. We teach her students about selecting measures. And so she and I had done kind of a preliminary literature search, and then she and her graduate assistant really dove into kind of the measures focused literature that we found, and ultimately selected those. And then I wrote the open-ended response questions, which were listed on the slide. Does that answer?
Yeah, thank you. I just thought, you know, in using an instrument from another discipline, that's where discussing these with disciplinary experts seems particularly important.
For sure. And those measures, you know, while they were created in the context of criminal justice and education research methods courses, they are general enough for the social sciences. And so when we were reviewing the items together, Diana and I agreed that they reflected themes that our students were encountering as well.
Mm-hmm. And I guess the same question applies to Heather and Ashley in selecting the teaching dimensions observation protocol. Just generally, how did you said that was a highly utilized scale, but did you, what factored into your choice of that? Were there other options, or was that highly cited?
Using the TDOT predominantly came out of my experiences on the QEP development committee. So I was on a committee with something like 30 faculty members from across campus, and this is what they all agreed upon as the way we would use to assess the university itself on our instructor effectiveness in active learning. We did dig into some of the research on it, and it did seem to work pretty well. It's been through 2 versions. The second version seems to be very easy to use. It also has an online component, which would have made it so much simpler to use had we known that when we wrote our IRB. Instead, we did it all on paper, and that made it a little more complicated. But the advantage of using it online is that it has an embedded clock. So the analysis is a lot easier later on. You know, observation can be hard. I mean, how do you standardize something like that? We had 3 researchers that were all going to be analyzing one observation or one lesson, and this gave us a guiding tool, at least, to center our conversation.
Thank you. We have a few more minutes if there are additional questions for any of our presenters, or I don't see any hands. I'm just trying to distinguish between comments and questions. I don't want to read all the comments.
Can I chime in on just something for a second? I know we talked about IRB and getting participants recruiting participants. We actually ran into a bit of a problem recruiting participants. Our group was so small, and then we asked them to do a video component, right? And that seemed to be the sticking point. Mm-hmm. Possibly could have had more participants be interested, but nobody wanted to be recorded. So if we were to do a similar study in the future, we may or may not use that element.
So what would you do instead? How would you assess like their movement? And
part of what we did in this study, even I would do again is we drew a pattern map of how instructors move around the room. And it might be instead of one of us doing that, we would have multiple people, or we would change. Part of the advantage of doing the video was so that we could come back and analyze it at a later time. And it may just be that we would have to commit to having multiple researchers in the room at the same time, recording these different elements. I don't know if that helps, but it was a sticky point that would be of interest to people.
Yeah, and I can see how the mapping might be something that more researchers are able to do. I mean, with limitations, budget limitations. Although you do need to have more people in the room.
And I'll just add to that, this is Heather. So we do try to coordinate so that there's 2 of us in the room at a time. So already that factor of having 2 individuals in the room, mapping everything that you're doing in the room and making 2-minute increment notations on the TDOP of the interactions that are happening is a little overwhelming for many of us. Some of us like to go into the space with the faculty member and the students and you know, do our deal. It's different when there's a peer sitting in the back of the room. I personally come from 20 plus years in K-12, part of that time as an administrator and an instructional coach. So for me, it's natural because I've come from that environment, but to help ease the anxiety of the participants, like Ashley said, that may be why we had reluctance, is because they're being observed, they're being recorded, etc. Although we try in everything that we could do in the IRB and in the self-interest survey to reassure them that it's not tied to their evaluation, it is not tied to anything that could be derogatory on their record, etc., that it's strictly for research purposes and confidentiality is maintained in every effort that we possibly can exercise. We don't even tell anyone else who's participating or who the participants are other than the 3 of us on the research team. But yes, it would be interesting if we took out certain components, or if, you know, in our video recording, once you get used to the little robot in the room, which really is an iPad or an iPhone or an Android on a swivel robot, once you get used to that, you forget it's there. So there's lots of factors that go into that, as you know, with any human research study.
I just wanted to share a comment from Julie Hornick and make sure all the presenters heard this. Really interesting presentations, everyone. It's great to see a sampling of the types of research projects everyone is undertaking, and energizing too. Good models to follow and lots of resources to look into. Thanks for all of your hard work. And that's a great comment. I certainly agree. Thank you so much for sharing. Are there any additional questions? Okay, so I'd just like to thank you all for attending. We'll put the link right now so that you can complete a survey to provide feedback on today's event. If you have any further questions, you can of course contact any of the presenters directly, or you can contact either of the co-chairs at our email addresses here. We hope to see you again at other EBSS events and at next year's forum, which is always in the spring. So please consider submitting a proposal next spring. We'll have announcements on several listservs, including the EBSS listservs, as we begin to collect proposals. Let's see, did we place, let's put a link to the, oh, I'm just going to put this in the chat, the link to the survey.
Thank you everyone for attending. And Annie's put the link there. We'll also send out all the information on the EBSS listserv as well. And Alois, I'm not sure if you're back yet, but you can stop the recording whenever you're ready.
Okay. My link is not working. Ah.